Maria Marta Arias was born in 1984 in La Banda, Santiago del Estero province, northwestern Argentina. Her mother was Maria Olga Alonso. In addition to Maria, she single-handedly raised her sons, Claudio and Juan. The brothers tenderly guarded and protected their little sister, who was affectionately called Martita. From early years, the girl was characterized by boundless kindness to others, knew a lot, and studied well. She really liked to learn languages, so her mother enrolled her in an English course at a private institute. It was there that Martita met a boy named Pablo Antonio Amin. They socialized for a short time, and soon their paths diverged. Born in 1983 to a middle-class family, Pablo was from the same town of La Banda in the province of Santiago del Estero. He was the son of Graciela Beatriz Rodriguez and her husband, of whom there is no information. The family also raised an older daughter named Andrea Bornell. When Pablo was 14 years old, he was responsible for the death of a peer in an unknown accident. The case was not launched because it was confirmed that there was no premeditation, and the young man at that age could not yet bear criminal responsibility. Just at that time, his sister Andrea moved to the province of Cordoba, where she continued her studies. Pablo, left alone, changed a lot. Surrounding people began to notice that he behaves embittered and aggressive, quickly gets hot, and enters into conflicts. Later, he became addicted to illegal substances. Once he tried to move to Cordoba to his sister, but could not settle there and returned to his parents' house. Thanks to the help of people close to him, Pablo began to undergo a rehabilitation program. Although the process was not easy and took more than 3 years, in the end, the young man was recognized as fully healthy. Encouraged, he began helping his family run their business. It was also known that he practiced martial arts and performed well. As for Maria, having grown up, she turned into a silent and modest girl. Outwardly, she was very pretty. Snow-white skin, long straight hair, big light eyes. The people close to her knew her as a good-natured, naive beauty, who was very easy to deceive. In 2004, Maria faced a serious illness. She was diagnosed with lupus erythematosus, a disease that affects the joints and muscles, causing inflammation of the organs. Immediate long-term treatment was required, and the girl started it immediately after discharge from the hospital, trying to strictly follow all the requirements to avoid exacerbations. Meanwhile, things were not going smoothly for Pablo either. The sudden death of his father shook him to the core. Sometime later, his mother Graciela was seriously injured in an accident, from which she never fully recovered and had to suffer from pain for a long time. One day, Graciela heard that a healer priest was coming to the local church and asked Pablo to take her there with the hope of recovery. At the church, they met Maria and the young people, who had not seen each other for many years, had a warm conversation and agreed to meet the next day. Thus, their communication was renewed. Soon the boy told his mother that he had a soulmate and would soon bring her home. Maria was, at that time, in her 3rd year at the National University of Santiago del Estero, studying economic sciences. She was still slim and very attractive. Pablo, whose height reached almost 2 meters in weight, 150 kilos, believed that he urgently needed to lose weight so that the girl paid attention to him. To this end, he began consuming a promoted herbal diet product. By 2005, Pablo had lost 88 pounds, and this in just a few months. He believed that he lost weight precisely because of the miracle remedy and became a salesman for the brand's products, using his experience as the best proof that the product worked. Soon his life began to revolve around the healing substance, which seemed almost magical to him. Pablo shared the news with Maria. There was a possibility that the line would include a product to help fight lupus. In 2007, the young finally became a couple. This news did not make Maria's brothers happy. The first time Juan saw Pablo in their home, he quietly asked his mother what the man was doing here. The guest felt that his presence did not please anyone, but he did not pay attention to it. As the days passed, he increasingly took over the will and life of Maria, who trusted him completely. It got to the point where he forced her to stop taking her usual medications for her illness and convinced her to switch to his products, claiming that they were much more effective. During sales conferences, Pablo enjoyed making the girl look like a guinea pig and claimed that her health improved after she started taking the advertised product. However, this was not true because the product he was promoting contained high levels of sodium, which was contraindicated in patients with lupus erythematosus. In mid-2007, in a church in Santiago, the lovers vowed to love and respect each other for life, and then, smiling, exchanged rings. Nevertheless, there was no official registration of the marriage. The couple fully devoted themselves to selling a famous line of diet products, leading in all ratings in their province. In those days, their income reached significant sums. This caused concern for the Alonso family, but not because of envy for the financial well-being of the young, but primarily because Maria worked without rest, which was a danger to her health, given the advice of doctors to lead a quiet lifestyle. The second cause of their anxiety was that by marrying, she had become estranged from them, and this was so inconsistent with her character. Mother Maria Olga felt that something was wrong with her daughter, and was sure that she did not come to visit so as not to worry the family. Many of the couple's mutual acquaintances claimed that Pablo took care of Maria. At the same time, there were those who believed that the husband and wife were openly competing in grocery sales. Initially, it seemed like a game, but eventually turned into a rivalry and then a feud. In addition, there was one incident, the details of which were never fully clarified. Several photographs surfaced showing Maria lying on a bed in the nude. It is not known whether these pictures were taken by her husband or herself, or perhaps by a third person, but they went out to the email accounts of many of Pablo's friends. Amidst these ups and downs in the couple's relationship, at the end of October 2007, they gathered in the neighboring province of Tucumán to attend a branding congress. On the morning of October 27th, Pablo and Maria picked up a few acquaintances who were to travel with them to Tucumán in their car. Luis Ramon Paz was one of them and didn't notice anything strange on the way. On the contrary, the couple joked around and were in good spirits. At the Congress, Pablo made a presentation. He did not feel very comfortable because the weather was hot and he was sweating a lot. The temperature in the area is very high and humid, and this had a serious effect on Pablo's health. Tall, still overweight, and wearing dark clothes, he read out his report. It was obvious that he was not feeling well. The man stammered every now and then. His buddy Luis noticed this. After a while, a conflict ensued. Shouting and waving his fists, Pablo tried to fight with another employee of the company, Luis Bader, suspecting his intention to steal his clients. Bader did not join the fight, and soon Maria intervened and calmed her spouse down. Pablo told his friend Luis that he wanted to return to Santiago, but he refused to drive with a man who was behaving inappropriately. Pablo got behind the wheel and he and Maria left the Congress venue. Sometime later, they were seen together along Independence Square. The couple was walking past boutiques with pirated copies of famous movies. Pablo was pacing ahead and in a great hurry, while Maria tried to catch up with him and tugged at his shirt. Pablo, whose consciousness, as he stated later, suddenly became foggy, started screaming that he was being chased and wanted to take his life. Maria did not know where to go from the shame. They later found their car and parked at a gas station. For the next 2 hours, the man ran away from the vocal threats he said were chasing him. Maria accompanied her husband, unable to leave him alone in such a state. The couple transferred repeatedly from cabs to buses and back again, eventually returning to a location just 3 blocks from the starting point of their route, the cathedral in front of Independence Square. It was certainly an incoherent journey. The cathedral was noisy with babies crying all around, waiting to be baptized at evening mass. The clock read 5 p.m. Pablo and Maria rushed inside. Perhaps the man wanted to calm the terrifying inner voice that wouldn't leave him, or maybe he just wanted to feign madness in front of witnesses. The couple stood first in line, disrespecting those who came earlier. Approaching the Holy Father, Pablo demanded that he baptize him. The priest, Jose Navarro, asked him to yield to the others and wait on the sidelines. But the man continued to insist. He also summoned a photographer who was working with one of his clients at the time. The priest touched Pablo's face, and the photographer, Fabiana Monte, took the picture at just the right moment. Before leaving the cathedral, Pablo took a sip of holy water. Father Jose noticed his hurried movements and lost look. He also noticed Maria's tears. When photographer Fabian went to look for the couple to sell them an image, he found no one. Once outside, Pablo and Maria went their separate ways. The woman was frightened by her husband's strange behavior and decided to go to her friends for help. The man was left alone. While he was in Independence Square, a policeman caught his eye. Pablo asked him to arrest him. The officer was surprised and called a patrol. Pablo got into a police car, which took him to the station. At the site, he calmly went inside and asked for water. He was given a glass. Pablo drank the water, then lay down on the floor before standing up and drinking directly from the tap. At this point, his friend and company partner Walter Cancino appeared at the police station. Pablo, ignoring Walter, began offering the diet product to the police officers. They laughed, calling him crazy. Despite the ridicule, he continued to insist on buying the medicine and repeated that he wanted to be put in jail, but instead he was sent to the hospital. At the hospital, the man caused a scandal and knocked over a medical module with surgical instruments. The doctor who examined him was satisfied that the arrival was in good health and told him that he was fine and just needed to sleep. Pablo therefore remained under police guard until his wife arrived. An hour later, they met. The man was already calm and said he would soon tell her the reason for his behavior. It was nightfall in Tucumán. Walter, a friend of the couple, was staying with his wife at the Catalinas Park Hotel. The facade of the park across the street was lit from below, and it looked very beautiful. The bar on the first floor had a shiny piano, and the stage was decorated with expensive paintings. Walter and his wife sat at a table and discussed Pablo's strange behavior. After midnight, Maria and her husband also checked into that hotel. They were given room 514, said hello to acquaintances at the bar, and several people saw them ride up in the elevator together, holding hands. When they entered the room, Pablo took off his pants and sweat-soaked shirt. Maria undressed as well. They lay on the bed naked, not speaking, and after a while the woman turned her back to her husband. At that moment, he climbed on top of her, put one knee on her chest, and grabbed her neck with both hands. Squeezing her as hard as he could, Pablo didn't let go until Maria stopped giving signs of life. Armed with a scalpel, which he had apparently stolen, the man made incisions in his wife's eyelids, removed Maria's eyes and placed her on the bed. After stabbing her several times with the scalpel, he grabbed the naked woman by the hair, dragged her out of the room and dragged her all the way to the first floor. He was stopped by hotel staff, and then police officers arrived on the scene. Pablo's screams could be heard even in the street. This horrible crime caused shock in the province, and the echoes of what happened spread throughout Argentina. The man was taken to a psychiatric hospital where he was placed in a room with bars on the windows. The next day, a local newspaper published a photograph of Pablo sleeping on a small bed, barely able to support his 264 pounds while bound hand and foot. The police officers were faced with a very difficult case. First, they had to determine whether Pablo was criminally responsible, that is, whether he was sane when he committed his acts. Then, they had to find the legal qualification of his act, and in those years, court officials did not have today's articles, which they used every day. Prosecutor Adriana Reynoso Cuello could not charge the detainee with aggravated murder, given the couple's marriage, because he and Maria were not officially in a relationship, but were only engaged in church. Also, at the time, there was no concept of domestic violence. A local newspaper bought from Fabian the very photo of Pablo and the priest, paying a small sum of money for the picture. Fabian knew the photo was worth more, but simply accepted the first offer. In the hospital, shortly after the crime, Pablo read the Bible and slept, and was periodically overcome by seizures. While in these circumstances, he managed to have a relationship with a missionary. In the meantime, the forensic physicians presented the autopsy results of Mary's body, which were gruesome and indicated numerous injuries to the unfortunate woman. After receiving the autopsy report, the court added a charge of defamation to the other charges. In April 2008, a medical board that evaluated Pablo's condition determined that he was mentally adequate for trial. As a result, he was charged with aggravated murder, and the court decided that the man should be transferred from the hospital to a regular prison. Thus, Pablo found himself in the prison of Villa Urquiza, sharing a cell with 25 of the most dangerous local criminals. The missionary continued to visit him, but later, for unknown reasons, their relationship ended. Pablo's first trip to the hearing occurred a few days later and was an almost cinematic event. At least 10 members of Legardo's group, the assault unit of the corrections service, accompanied the man. The presence of this gigantic volume defendant caused tremendous excitement in the courtroom. Dozens of journalists fought hand-to-hand with the enforcers to reach the defendant with their microphones. Pablo was greeted by Adriana, the prosecutor, at the entrance to Investigation Department 6, and before she could say anything, he asked her for a cigarette. While reading the magistrate's decision, he was distracted by his clothes, buttoning the first button on his buttonhole. He sat down opposite Soledad Aguirre, who was in charge of the case, and listened silently to the accusation against him. Afterward, Pablo warned that he was not going to say anything. For the defense, represented by attorney Roberto Flores, he argued that he acted against his wife because he could not control his actions and based his chosen strategy on that. The lawyer for the deceased's family, Maria Arias, made the opposite argument. He stated that Pablo could not have acted in a state of emotional excitement, as a person devoid of reason is not capable of so skillfully cutting out the victim's eyes and then extracting them without damaging them. Counsel also accused the defendant of jealousy of Walter and argued that their unhealthy rivalry reached a boiling point on that fateful day. Finally, he advanced that the greatest indicator that the man had planned the whole thing was the imitation of insanity displayed a few hours earlier on the day of the crime. Mario characterized this behavior as a strategy aimed solely at trying to evade responsibility for the atrocity. The members of the medical board that had evaluated Pablo's mental state were in the same vein. Despite all this, he remained calm and pretended that what was happening did not concern him at all. The only one who was concerned about the defendant's behavior was Graciela, his mother, who requested that her son be treated with respect. As he left the court, Pablo made inappropriate gestures. On June 13, 2008, at the continuation of the hearing, the defense announced that the defendant wanted to testify. This time, he restrained himself and did not put on a show. After telling his version of events, Pablo stated that he loved his wife and repented for his actions, but not because he was on trial or because of possible punishment, but because he missed Maria. Nevertheless, when he was asked to tell what he had done with a surgical scalpel, the man remained silent. That night, after the murder of her daughter, Maria Olga could not sleep without pills. She believed that her son-in-law had done that to the eyes of the unfortunate woman for a reason. In Maria Olga's opinion, the daughter must have seen something bad in her spouse, and that's why he decided to deprive her of her sight. The inconsolable woman found no other explanation for such cruelty. The scalpel used by the killer was never found. Investigators ruled out the possibility that Pablo could have flushed it down the toilet or thrown it out the window. Agents searched under the windows of the building but found nothing. Mario's attorney speculated that the man passed the sharp object to his friends, who were staying at the same hotel. But the friends interviewed insisted that they learned of the incident later and at the time of the events did not hear any sounds. The trial against Pablo began on September 7, 2009. The defendant entered the courthouse under police guard. He was dressed in a green shirt, unbuttoned almost to the middle of his chest. He then sat down in front of the assessors of the Tucumán Criminal Court. A policeman held up a microphone to him, but Pablo pushed it away, and what he said was hard to hear. The police officer brought the microphone up again, but the man pushed it away again. The officer brought the device closer a third time, and Pablo behaved exactly as he had before. The fourth time, after the officer's demands, Pablo touched the microphone and then pushed it away again. Thus, some of his phrases could not be heard by the court, and in general his answers were a series of incoherent words. Without losing an ounce of composure, Judge Emilio tried to reach the man's mind, which seemed impossible. Pablo's same nonsensical attitude persisted when the judge questioned him about his relationship with Maria. After the nonsensical chatter, Pablo returned to his seat and began to wriggle, interrupting the flow of the hearing. He adjusted his clothes, unbuttoned them, smiled, spit into the glass of water he was drinking, raised his shoulders, moved constantly in his chair, and yawned. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the members of the court threw him out of the room, but it didn't help. One of Pablo's worst behaviors in those days was when he asked the clerk if he wanted him to gouge out his and the lawyer's eyes. His only goal was to convince everyone of his insanity. But his mental state was analyzed by 15 experts, and 13 of them said that the man was perfectly aware of everything at the time of the murder. The most emotional episode at the hearing was the testimony of Juan and Claudio, Maria's brothers, who described how many hours a day their sister worked, even to the detriment of her own health, to please her demanding husband. They described Pablo as an extremely jealous man who psychologically pressured his wife. According to Juan and Claudio, their son-in-law was obsessed with non-existent plots against himself and questioned Maria's fidelity without reason. The men claimed that Pablo had deliberately forbidden his wife to communicate with her relatives and then wantonly and cruelly took her life. As they left the Palace of Justice, the brothers, ready to burst into tears, held hands and hugged each other. In September 2009, the judges of the Second Division of the Criminal Court declared Pablo guilty of murder with particular cruelty and argued that he had feigned insanity in order to deceive the court administration and obtain impunity or a lesser sentence. Before sentencing, he was given the opportunity to confess, but Pablo again behaved as inadequately as he had on all previous days. He was eventually given a life sentence. In September 2011, the country's Supreme Court upheld the decision. A short time later, news reports revealed that Pablo had learned to play the violin while behind bars and that he had been denied a request to study law at the National University of Tucumán. The reviews stated that he was not allowed to study because of the heinous crime for which he was convicted and because of serious problems in prison. It turned out that he made himself look like a victim of other inmates and supposedly barely survived in that hell. But over time, Pablo gained the respect of his cellmates and took a leadership position. One of the facts that the inmates considered him a respected person was the complaints he filed with the Argentine court about the inhumane treatment he had suffered and that other inmates had also suffered. It was this leadership that led penal officials to choose him several times to resolve conflicts with rioters in the prison. Pablo did not participate in riots, and if there were problems, he would sit in his cell. By this behavior, he showed some inmates that he preferred a calm dialogue because it was in conversations that a solution could be found. The man who seemed determined to be a model of good behavior also managed to get a minister's license in the prison church and to become a member of the choir. According to some media outlets, Pablo spent time studying the works of Alex Day, a well-known motivator and author of self-help books. In 2017, the killer met a female hairdresser who was visiting another inmate in the same prison. They began to communicate, and New Year's Eve became a double celebration for Pablo, because on December 31, he married his sweetheart. The civil ceremony was followed by a religious rite of passage in the presence of relatives. Although they were separated by the thick concrete walls of the prison, his wife repeatedly traveled long distances to visit Pablo. Those closest to the man said that this unexpected love inspired him to compose poems and songs, at a time when he had almost given up hope of going free. Sometime later, after numerous court hearings and listening to the reports of a psychologist and the accounts of people who had interacted with Pablo in prison, the Tucumán court granted him temporary releases at intervals of 2 times a month for 3 hours. The decision was made on June 29, 2023. However, when asked about the opinion of Gonzalo Garcia of the Department of Corrections, he opposed it. In his belief, psychological and psychiatric reports stated that Pablo should never be released into society, mainly because he was still a man incapable of controlling his emotions. In contrast, specialist Carlos Corrado was in favor of granting the said indulgence. According to his assessment, Pablo has not posed any danger to others for years. Corrado argued that, as a physician, he could identify the inmate's worsening mental health in a timely manner and intervene to correct the problem. Pablo, in his opinion, would no longer assault other people. So, the man was allowed to leave the prison under the protection of 3 Tucumán correctional officers. In addition, an additional control in the form of a locator was placed on his wrist. The officers were to accompany him to and from his new home in the capital city of Tucumán. Pablo and his new wife have a daughter who will be 9 years old in 2023, and having a child was one of the reasons he was granted release. Under current Argentine law in 2042, after 35 years in prison, Pablo will be able to start asking for parole. And in the years leading up to that distant date, he will have the right to request a reduction in his sentence. The family of Maria Arias said they see this as a mockery and an insult. A dangerous killer who took away their most precious possessions is being allowed to go free as if he poses absolutely no threat. Yet the relatives of the dead woman had to admit that they had no other choice and were forced to accept the court's decision.